Undernight in Birth was a game created out of desperation. French Bread, the small indie studio that made Undernight, was pretty much screwed at the time. They had just lost a major licensed game deal. Another deal left them on red during their greatest time of need, and the times were against them, as rapid technological advancements in hardware and 3D animation changed the game for fighting game development, making it nearly impossible for anyone who didn't have the money to adapt to these changes in order to make it. Or so we thought. Though it would take 7 years, this game would make it to the main stage of the biggest fighting game tournament in the world. This game would have its own tournament dedicated to it and all other games made by French Bread. This game would become the FGC's secret staple game. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to tell you a story about how this became this. And to start the story, we have to go back in time, before Melty, before Tsukihime, before even Type Moon itself, to the 1990s. Where French Bread took its first steps into creating its own legend of the night, Undernight in Birth. The 5th generation of gaming was a huge milestone in gaming history. Not only was PC gaming becoming a thing, with games like Doom, Quake, and StarCraft coming out, arcades were going strong with advancements in both 2D and 3D graphics, and higher def audio. And console gaming also benefited, but the most important product that came out of this era was the PlayStation. You see, the 5th generation of gaming created the second gaming boom around the world. People were playing games any way they could, and everyone was scrambling to get a piece of that pie. Because of this, you will see a lot of famous games come out of this era. Games like Tokumiki Memorial and Too Hard will become hugely popular and bring forth the dating sim and visual novel genres. Fighting games will also explode during this era as well, with games like Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Fighting Layer, Guilty Gear, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Samurai Showdown, Virtua Fighter, Killer Instinct, Marvel vs. Capcom, King of Fighters, the Alpha series, and you get the point. This may seem a little odd that I'm talking about all of this, when the PlayStation alone will bring forth many games out into the world that are far more popular than the games I just listed. But it's games like these that will set the Japanese indie Doujin scene ablaze, with new people hopping on to create new stuff and get paid for it, including one Nobuya Narita. After gathering up a crew, they would try to make their mark on the world by creating Doujin games under the name Watanabe Seisakujo, or Watanabe Productions. Their first game would be called The Queen of Heart 98. If you didn't know, Doujin basically means low-level indie works, fan games, and mega unknown small teams new to the space. And this kinda shows. But just to be on the safe side, don't look it up on the internet. Queen of Heart 98 would be a spoof of King of Fighters 98, with characters from games by Studio Leaf, including Too Hard, mixed in. Now, if this was just a simple sprite swap, this story would end here. But there was something special in the Queen of Heart. It didn't play 100% like KOF. Something was mixed in, or should I say, 2 games were mixed in, namely Moonlights 2 and Asuka 120%. While Moonlights 2 was not really one to write home about now, it was a Doujin darling back in the day. It was a 2-button fighting game which lets you play as a bunch of different characters from a spread of works. I mean, where else are you gonna play as Rei and fight Sailor Moon or Ryuko from Tenchi Muyo? As big as Moonlight's 2 would be, Asuka 120% would define a genre. I mean, really, a lot of the biggest anime fighting games you play today would be directly inspired by Asuka 120%, including mechanics like clashing, what happens when two moves hit each other at the same time, running dash, double jumps, Gatling style combos, where you create combos by hitting buttons of increasing strength, one after the other, and the air-heavy neutral game that anime fighters are known for. As for the game itself, it was a 3-button fighter about girls from different school clubs who beat up each other. Well, girls and a grown man for some reason. With the influence that these games had on Queen of Heart, the game would be met with great reception. Enough reception to create multiple sequels and fund their future projects. And I'm not gonna lie to you, these future projects kinda went all over the place. Let me show you. We have Ayu-chan Punch, a Mario Bros clone featuring characters from Kanan, a visual novel from the game studio Key, better known as the creators of Clannad and Angel Beats. Demon Hunter Mai, an adventure game featuring Mai, also from Kanan, and Air Flight, an arcade game based on another Key game, Air. Yeah, it's a bit random. Narita wasn't too happy about this. He felt like they can do better than Doujin fanworks, actually putting work in to become a real studio with real licensed game contracts. They would reach out to a bunch of companies only to get shut down one by one. To be honest, it wasn't looking good for our crew, but luckily they will meet 3 people that will help them out greatly in the future. The first one will be an artist that went by the name of Harukaze Namikai, who together with the Watanabe crew will create Glove on Fight, a Doujin boxing fighting game. We will see Harukaze again later down the timeline. But for now, let's move on to the other 2, who would give the Watanabe crew their first big break, though kinda unintentionally. December 2000, the writer Kanoko Natsu and the artist Takashi Takeuchi would create their first Doujin game called Tsukihime Lunar Legend under the name Tight Moon. Tsukihime would be a breakout success, so much so that it would kickstart Tight Moon's journey to become one of the biggest media companies in Japan. But for right now, they were just 2 roommates that really didn't know what they had at the time, which led to some questionable spin-offs, due to them just giving licenses away, with little care of what would happen. Narita, seeing this as the opportunity to elevate their status and leave the Doujin world behind, would dress up the team as professionally as possible and give Tight Moon a pitch for an officially licensed, official Tsukihime fighting game, fully loaded with an official design dog, with official moveset mockups. The Watanabe crew may have come off as a little too professional, but what can I say? Melty Blood was made, and the rest is in another video. Soon after Melty Blood was released, Narita thought it was time to change the name of the studio in order to get away from their Doujin roots, with the core staff composed of Nobuya Narita as producer and writer, Shiichi Yoshihara as head artist, Kamone Serizara as head of battle design and head programmer, Takehiko Wakezuma on FX and UI, and Matsuru Kuba, aka Raito, aka the creator of some of the best fighting game music ever, as head composer. The name that they would choose would be French bread, and at times, all they had for meals was French bread and tap water. Just goes to show you, in order to make the ultimate poverty game, you must live in poverty. Now, French bread is not their official name, as you cannot copyright a common noun. So legally, French bread is called Unknown Company Limited, which as of recently is now reflected in their website. French bread was looking up with a shiny new name and a shiny new license deal, but their days of eating French bread were not over yet. Even though French Bread changed their name and vowed to never do Doujin again, they made 3 more Doujin games. Bike Bandits, a scrolling shooter, Drill Milky Punch, a horror survival game featuring characters from Studio Age, the same people who made the School Days visual novel, and Lillian Forehand, another shooter based on Maria Watches Over Us. Bike Bandits and Drill Milky Punch would both come out in 2003. The same year, they have switched names. I'm willing to forgive these two because French Bread was most likely already working on these two games before they made the switch, and just didn't want to throw it away. Which leaves Lillian Forehand, which came out in 2009, 6 years later. Now, I'm sure you're asking why. Well, the answer's simple. Because 2008 would be the downfall of French Bread, but also a new beginning. I guess the first bump in the road would come in the form of a game called Ragnarok Battle Offline, a fan game based off the once ultra popular Korean MMO Ragnarok Online. Ragnarok Battle Offline would have quite an interesting origin story. You see, Glove on Fight artist Harukaze Namikai loved Ragnarok Online enough to create a fan animation for it, and other fans of the game loved it. Maybe a bit too much. Now, the details were a bit hazy, as a lot of the sources detailing what happened is lost. Even the original fan animation was hard to find. But due to a large amount of people saying, make this a game, their wish was granted. And with the combination of Harukaze, French Bread, and Gravity, the owner of the Ragnarok Online IP, they would show the world Ragnarok Battle Offline in 2004 to South Korea and Japan only. Well, at first. The game actually sold a lot, so Gravity released the game all over East Asia, including Indonesia, Taiwan, Thailand, and even the Philippines. They would keep working on the game for 2 more years, releasing 3 different expansions until May 21st, 2006, where development of the game ended. Again, details were hazy. Some people say it was because French Bread wasn't getting paid enough. Others say that the rapid decline of Ragnarok Online was a factor. But it didn't matter. The deal was now gone. Back in Melty Land, things weren't looking too good either. As well, Melty Blood was doing well. 2008 came around and spelled doom for Melty Blood. For those who didn't know, 2008 was the year CRT technology was made obsolete with the advent of HD LEDs. This wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the fact that this change will also bring a change in aspect ratio, going from the almost square 4:3 ratio to the rectangle of 16:9. Now, with other media, this wouldn't be too much of an issue, but with video games, this mattered a lot. And with hardware getting switched out to keep things fresh and new in arcades, all games had to accommodate for this change in aspect ratio. Melty had to be changed to fit the new tech, so French Bread contacted Type Moon with 2 options to continue the Melty Blood project. 1. Rebuild Melty Blood from the ground up to accommodate the new aspect ratio. Or 2. Create a new game, Melty Blood 2, which ironically was much easier to do. Unfortunately for French Bread, Type Moon picked option 3, shelved the whole project because they were too busy working on another game. And with that maybe later, Melty Blood was done for. They couldn't continue the project story-wise, so they were just stuck with what they had. And so the lost years began. With no work in sight, they did everything they could to keep the lights on. They would call Harukaze to help create Glove on Fight 2, Gleam of Force, this time with all original characters. They would release Lillian Forehand, their first real Doujin work in 6 years. The path was looking pretty dark. The 09 era was right around the corner, and everybody was making games with 3D graphics now. But luckily, for French Bread, there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. That light being Blaze Blue Calamity Trigger. Blaze Blue changed the game for 2D fighting games. The HD sprites wowed everyone, and still looks good to this day. It was on a whole different level than anything that was on the market when it came to 2D games. But never mind all that. French Bread saw this game and decided it was time to stand up on their own 2 feet and make a new fighting game. So they went to work. For the next few years, French Bread would split his time between finishing up Melty Blood and working out ideas for the new fighting game. A tall order to be sure, but Shiichi Yoshihara, French Bread's head artist, had been sitting on a collection of drawings that he had been working on since high school. With the approval of the rest of the crew, he would redraw them into a more organized fashion and present them to the team. They loved it, and French Bread immediately got to work on the game, calling it Yoshihara Fighting Game. But we will be calling it Undernight Zero. It's a cooler name, and this version of the game will have a vastly different story than the Undernight we would get. We'll come back to the reason why later, but first, let me show you what was lost. Have you ever seen Total Recall and My Hero Academia? Well, Undernight Zero's story was basically those two stories put together, with a few twists here and there. Let me explain. Undernight Zero takes place in a cyberpunk setting, where most of the people lived in mega cities, and most people were born with superpowers called Werfs. Given that they call superpowers Werfs, it's safe to say that society treats you differently solely based on how strong your power was. So if you were born with no powers, you were deemed worthless and were publicly shamed and kicked out of their mega cities. But hey, it's not so bad. The worthless would come together to create metal trash villages after they found a way to make a special type of metal that was able to suppress and cut through Werfs. Pretty good for making weapons for self-defense. Now that we have our setting, let's get to the story. Once upon a time, there was an evil research company called Ouroboros. Ouroboros would conduct human experiments in order to create more powerful Werfs in order to line their pockets. At the beginning of the story, Jekyll, the owner of Ouroboros, had his top researcher, Hilda, and her night bodyguard, Londrakia, work on a little girl that they have found, with the power to heal people at the cost of taking the damage onto herself. Drawback aside, this was a pretty incredible work, and they would conduct experiments just to see how far it can go, calling the power and the girl herself reincarnation, as they wanted to use her powers to bring people back to life. But they never got to do so, because one day, an older boy named Hyde would steal the little girl away from Ouroboros and somehow make it out of the city. When Hyde asked the girl what her name was, she tried to say reincarnation, but only Rene could come out. So mishearing what was said, Hyde called her Line, as they both ran to the nearest metal trash village, and the village chief, Walstein, would take the kids as his own, training them in the ways of survival, self-defense, and how to craft and use the anti-Werf metal. A time skip would happen as the two would grow up, and everything seemed fine until Ouroboros showed up to attack the village and reclaim Line. Hilda would use her powers of darkness, Londrakia's powers of light, and her biomechanical robot army, with Fatista, a robo-maid filled with heavy weaponry, and the multi-fighting Merkava team, tailor-made to be too stretchy for the anti-Werf metal to cut. They would destroy the village, take Line, and almost kill Hyde if it wasn't for the talking sword Grim Days coming out of nowhere to help Hyde out. The main story would start from here, as Hyde would use Grim Days to get Line back, meeting the rest of the cast along the way. Carmine at the time would just be a random guy who would attack people to fuel his blood powers. Shimito, a whip user with sound powers, who was looking for her worthless older brother, Gordo, no relation, I think. Zohair, a crazy girl with reality-bending powers. Mercedes, a boy with a stripper name who has the same powers as Adeline from Kirby 64, who just so happens to be hunting down Line so she can bring his dead parents back to life. And Dios, an actual vampire. The whole story would end with Hyde fighting Jekyll and finding out that Jekyll has the powers of cloning himself, and that Hyde was a clone made to unknowingly lead Ouroboros to the metal trash village. And of course, from the beginning, Hyde had no memory where he came from, so boom, Total Recall. If I spoiled you on Total Recall, you had like, I don't know, 30-ish years, so I'm sorry. To be honest, I very much liked the idea behind Undernight Zero. It had a whole lot of cool ideas behind it. Unfortunately, Narita asked for help, and that help would single-handedly change the direction of Undernight forever. As development of Undernight Zero was going on, Narita wanted help. He wanted to find out how to make sprites as nice as Blaze Blues, along with other general help to make sure that Undernight was a success. There was only one group that will have that knowledge and that could help him at the time. Arc System Works. And to everybody's surprise, not only did they answer the call for help, Toshimitsu Mori, the creator of BlazBlue himself, would become the team's mentor. Now, this would be a complete and absolute win on their part, but then Mori told Yoshihira that Hyde should look more like a protagonist. And with that one bit of advice, Undernight Zero was destroyed, and something new took its place, with the wave of changes that came after that one sentence. At this point, it was a new game with a new setting, one called Void Red, the unknown actor. So Void Red had a lot of different changes along the way until it became Undernight's final story. But the setting stayed more or less the same all the way through. Void Red turned what was once a sci-fi story to a modern fantasy akin to Persona 3. In fact, the story for this game would be a lot like Persona 3. Almost to a suspect amount. You have high school kids and adults fight zombie-like monsters inside of a mysterious pocket dimension that only occurs at night, using powers that come from that same pocket dimension. I was kind of joking at first. You see what I mean when I explain the setting a little bit? Undernight takes place in the city of Kanzaki, a town near the mountains. It's a pretty normal city, save for the fact that once a month, the city is enveloped in a pocket dimension called the Hollow Knight. The Hollow Knight can't be entered normally, or even perceived normally, as once you're in the Hollow Knight, you are cut off from the rest of the world, with all electronic devices not working as well. The only way to enter the Hollow Knight is basically be there when it spawns. It wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the fact that the Hollow Knight is filled with shadowy figures called Voids, who want to do nothing but consume anybody who enters. With that in mind, let's talk about how powers work in Undernight. It's pretty complicated and half-baked, to the point where they made a whole PowerPoint to explain this, but I'll try my best to explain. When somebody is trapped in the Hollow Knight, they get attacked by Voids. It works kind of like zombie rules. So if a person dies from the attack, they get turned into a void. If they get bitten, they also get turned into a void, but not all the time. You see, everybody is born with the innate power called existence, or exist. If you are bitten by a void, the void energy infects you like a virus. If the virus takes over you, you become a void. But if the exist energy and the void energy mix together and finds a balance within you, you mutate and become what is called an inbirth. Now able to use exist energy in the form of a unique superpower. Now, this doesn't exactly mean you are saved from being turned to a void, however. If you use too much exist, the void energy takes over and turns you, and voids will still attack you to either kill you or fill you up with more void energy. Also, strangely enough, not using your powers at all will cause the void virus to leave and fully reverse the mutation, turn you back into a normal human. Now that we got all that out the way, let's talk cast and story. So, Void Red will have a major rewrite in the middle of development. So I'm going to go over the changes that each character went through, going from Undernight Zero to Void Red to the Void Red rewrite, which is pretty close to the real story of Undernight. Starting with Hyde. Hyde is now a high school student who is trapped in the Hollow Knight and was saved by Line, becoming an in-birth in the process. He will get a new sword called Void Red. This sword doesn't talk, but hey, it can at least cut through anything. The only difference between pre and post rewrite Hyde was that pre-rewrite Hyde had a childhood friend with him named Ageha. She would also be trapped in the Hollow Knight, but instead of getting saved by Line, she would become an out-of-control in-birth named Zotos and would become the final boss. Well, before she was cut, that is. Line will have her post-time skip design be her final design. Pre-rewrite, she will be a researcher studying the Hollow Knight until she was betrayed by her underling, Hilda. She was only able to survive by taking over the body of a young girl and is now after Hilda in order to stop her quest for power. Post-rewrite, she will become the princess of a long-lost village of in-births, who was cursed to have her soul take over the body of a young girl every time she dies. Of course, she doesn't like the fact that she's ruining the lives of these girls, so she seeks out Void Red in order to end her curse and die. Malstein will have the same design but with more hair. This time he would serve as Line's protector, and instead of an old man, he would be a super mutated inbirth, and an old man. There will be more to his story, but let's just save that for later in the video. Carmine's design would stay mostly the same, and he would become the first inbirth before the rewrite, needing other people's blood to live. But post-rewrite, he'll once again be just some punk kid with blood powers. Batista would go from a robot maid to a robot doll that was created to protect the secrets of the Hollow Knight from everybody who would use it for evil. Before the rewrite, she would actually just be a doll before she was infected by voids and turned more human-like. But after the rewrite, she would just become one of a series of robots made to protect the Hollow Knight. Mercado would stay the same for the most part. He went from being an army of robots controlled by Hilda to an army of voids controlled by Hilda to just a powerful void that is able to actually think and talk. But this time, not controlled by Hilda. Speaking about Hilda, Hilda wants to use the powers of the Hollow Knight in order to grow more powerful. Before the rewrite, she was just a researcher. But after the rewrite, she is basically now a mob boss. I will say this though, I kinda missed the lab coat design. But let's move on. Okay, this is gonna sound weird, but we are going to have to group Dios and Landrakia together. These two will be cut for some reason or the other, but they will basically be cut into pieces and turned into 5 different characters. 2 will be added to the game later, while the other 3 will be Aurier, Gordeau, and an unnamed character. French Bread thought that Uni needed more female characters, so they would take Landrakia and basically make the female version of him, and thus Aurier was created. She will be high school class president and friends with Hyde by day, and void hunting battle nun by night, belonging to a group called the UNICLR, who wants to protect the worlds from voids. The unnamed character would also be part of this group until the rewrite had him cut, as the UNICLR became an all-female group. This leads to Gordeau, the mercenary and bartender who was added after the rewrite because French Bread wanted a cool character. And to that, I say they succeeded. Speaking about cut characters, Zohair, Chimari, and Mercedes would all be cut as playable characters during the rewrite, and brought back as side characters in later versions of the game. But the rewrite would bring 2 more characters. You see, French Bread thought the game needed someone to brighten up the cast a little bit, to make the game less edgy. So they created Yuzuriha, a carefree shrine maiden, personal friend of Hyde, and long-lost child of Virgil. And it will be a little strange because at the same time, the next character that would be added was Seth. And just one look at Seth tells you that he's as edgy as it comes. Seth is a ninja sworn to protect Line, and also acts as Hyde's rival, which is pretty funny seeing that he was created using parts of Hyde's Undernight Zero designs. But we now have our starting cast: Hyde, Line, Waldstein, Fastira, Merkava, Carmine, Aurier, Seth, Yuzuriha, and Gordeau. With little changes here and there, French Bread will show off the game for the first time on February 6, 2011, during the Hydra GP Winter Festival, under its new and final name, Undernight Inbirth. This video is brought to you in part by Iago. Hey, I play anime fighting games, watch anime, read manga, and stay on Twitter exclusively for fighting game tournament stuff and Japanese art Twitter. Or, I guess it's X now or whatever. Anyway, I tried to learn Japanese, but learning a new language can be difficult. I mean, let's be honest, you can just watch any of my videos and see me fail at trying to say anything in Japanese. But this is where Iago comes in. It's just like Anki, the open source flashcard app, but it's more plug and play, using spaced repetition to help you learn words efficiently. You can use the free web browser extension to hover over words on YouTube and Netflix, and mine the sentence for new words to learn. Or you can add words manually from other sources like games and whatnot. The mobile app is coming soon, but until then, go ahead and follow @LearnWithIago on Twitter, or I mean X, for more updates and fun little giveaways and videos. Friends, let's learn Japanese together. Undernight Inbirth we'll just call it Uni for now, would have a small advertisement campaign ranging from February 6, 2011 to its release date on September 20th, 2012. The campaign would be filled with fairly standard stuff, like character announcements on popular gaming magazine Arcadia, and public tests at various expos and arcades. To say that Uni came out with a bang would be an understatement, or rather, a flat-out lie. Frenchbread was still too poor for things like getting a publishing deal for a console's release, or a big advertising budget, so they did what they could. They would work with Sega and push out Uni to Japanese arcades only. To not so warm reception, Uni was considered kusoge, a trash game, as it was filled with various bugs, poor balancing, and straight up infidence. But that wouldn't stop Frenchbread from improving Undernight for years to come. But before we continue the story, let's take some time to learn how to play Uni. Uni was a 4-button 2D fighting game that was intentionally made to be the total opposite of Melty Blood gameplay-wise. While Melty Blood was all about fast-paced, aggressive action with a lot of air neutral going on, Uni was more grounded, slower-paced, with strong defensive options. Almost to the point where people started to call it anime Street Fighter, as it was considered a link between the normal footsie fighter and anime fighting games. But you gotta trust me on this one, it's an anime fighter. Uni is a pretty standard 4-button game, with your A button being your quick and short-reaching light normals, the B button being your go-to medium attack, and your C button being your heavy and long-reaching heavy attacks. But last but definitely not least, you have your D button, or exist button, which is linked to what makes Uni, the grid system. To put it simply, when you are playing Uni, you are playing 2 games at the same time. Uni the fighting game, and Uni the tug-of-war game. At the bottom of the screen, you see a row of squares and a timer. This is the grid. Your job is to get more squares than the other player at the end of the 16.5 second timer. Winning the game puts you into what is called Vorpal state, which gives you a 10% damage buff, and the ability to either use the special mechanic system or keep the buff. So, how do you gain these blocks? You gain blocks by basically playing well. Things like moving forward, taking throws, which is a bit easier in Uni because of the 14 frame window you're given, getting hit with a long combo, and making good use of everything attached to the D button. You can also lose blocks or worse by doing the opposite. The D button is how all the stuff at the bottom is used. Starting with holding down the D button, you get concentration. By using concentration, you both gain grid and take away grid from your opponent. But be careful, you lose grid if you get hit while doing concentration. Assault. By hitting forward and D, you get the game's short hop mechanic, if you're on the ground anyway. If you're in the air, it basically becomes an air dash. Chain shift. A system mechanic that lets you freeze the game for a few frames. You can cancel it from most attacks, make gaps in pressure easier to punish, and many other fun stuff. It's a simple but powerful mechanic that you can only use during Vorpal state, and you lose it as soon as you use it. But it's not all bad, because when you use chain shift, not only do you get the frame freeze, but it also turns all the blocks you have into meter. All you have to do is hit the D button twice. Next up is shield, a really strong defensive mechanic that when mastered can change the way the game is played. So there are 2 different types of shield, blue and green. Blue is activated by holding back and D. When you block a move with shield on, you make that move less safe on block, and it also pushes the other player away from you a little bit. Green shield, on the other hand, doesn't change the block move at all, but instead pushes the 2 players away from each other. Kinda like push block, you activate it by tapping D when you're blocking or shielding a move. Now, something so powerful as to let you control the other player just by blocking has to have a drawback, right? Well, yes, shield has the same rules as high and low blocking, but with the added detriment of if you get hit or grabbed while you're in shield, you get grid broken, which locks off most of what the D button does, until the cooldown bar is done. This hurts a lot because it locks off a lot of options, including your supers, your infinite worths, which is done by inputting a half circle forward in D, and your infinite worth exists, which is done by inputting all 4 buttons at the same time. Both cost 200 meter, but infinite worth exists can only be done at 30% health. I guess my point is the exist button does a lot, and you should be careful how you use shield. This is a lot, but you don't have to force yourself to learn it all at once. Uni has mechanics to help simplify things a bit, like Smart Steer, an A button auto combo you can do by mashing the A button, passing links in reverse beat, basically allowing you to instantly chain normal attacks together, either by inputting them forward or backwards. And there are also dash attacks, like in Smash. It's safe to say that Uni is pretty complex, but that's what makes it so engaging, and there is stuff to help you out. But let's get back to the story. As French Bread worked on Uni more, they will add 2 more characters, leading up to 12 playable characters so far. Hilda, who is acting as the boss character of Uni, and Elton, French Bread's original OC. Please do not steal. Both will come out in November and December, with Elton being playable early by entering a secret code. But Elton wouldn't be the only surprise waiting for Uni players in December, as New Year's Eve would bring one more surprise to our little game that could. On the Christmas of 2012, Naruto would make a Christmas post on Twitter teasing a new character. Who was this mystery character? We will find out on September 9th, 2013. But we can't just jump there. Uni will have a lot of important updates leading up to September. Guard Thrust will be added as a mechanic, and a rollable move that will get you out of really bad spots for just 100 meter. Along for a Christmas mystery character, 2 more characters will also be announced. But even though they will both get in the game in due time, both were delayed. One due to quote-unquote story conflicts, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But the other will be delayed due to issues with the PS3 port, or at least the PS3 port they were trying to do, as apparently wasn't going so hot for French Bread, to the point where they were having so much difficulty making a PS3 port, they had to go get help to make it. And once again, none other than Arc System Works will answer their call. Now with that all out of the way, it's time for the first major update of Undernight Inbirth. Undernight Inbirth executable late, better known as UNIEL. And first major update is right, because this update will bring a lot of balance changes, bringing Uni out of Kusoge range. UNIEL will also add Force Function, a unique move exclusive to each character, done by hitting the B and C button at the same time. And most important of all, the new character from the tweet will be added to the game, Kei Asuma, better known as Chaos. Chaos will be the puppet character of the game, using a lizard-like beast that lives in the book he carries, named Azhe Dehaka. Interestingly enough, just like how Hyde and Seth were tied together because they're made from the same character, Chaos and Gordo would be best friends, because they were both made from parts of Dios, the Trash Christ character, and Landrakia. Well, maybe not Landrakia. Gordo did not get any part of Landrakia. With this new update, UNIEL was starting to pick up steam. People thought Uni was a good game now, so before they put their full effort into the PS3 port, they will keep the hype going by putting out one more guest character, Akazuki, from Akazuki Blinskov, made by Subtle Style, another small studio that helps French Bread with sprite work from time to time, rounding our character count to 14. On April 22nd, 2014, Weekly Famitsu magazine would announce to the world that Arc System Works would be French Bread's publisher for UNIEL's PS3 port, and later for pretty much everything else. The console port will come out on July 24th, 2014 to Japan only. And to be completely honest, the PS3 port kinda sucked. It didn't really have much. You had 3 ways to play arcade mode: offline versus with CPU for some reason, a training mode, and a gallery mode. But hey, at least people can play online now. And the game will get 2 new characters. The once delayed Nanatsu, an interesting Shoto character. She'll have wind powers, the worst theme song in the game, the ability to only speak in sexual assault allegations, and for some reason, Rasengan is a super. The other character would be Byakuya. Though the PS4 port would be released everywhere else around 2 years later, even though it was just Japanese only, a console port means an international release due to imports. Uni had already gone global, meaning that the global Uni community was already being born. But that's not really my story to tell.
So looking at where the Undernight community started and where we're at right now, it's been a pretty long road. I mean, the game came out in arcade. I think the very first version is pretty long time ago, 2013 or 14, maybe even earlier. But it didn't get any console release. That's Undernight in Birth, just Undernight in Birth. But EL, EXE Latest, that's the first version that we got on consoles. And that was on PS3 at the time, 2014 or 15, man, my dates are, it's been a while now. But that's kind of where it started, as a game that was made by French Bread, and a game that was, we heard kind of from watching footage of arcade, footage of UNIB, that game kind of had infinites and all kinds of crazy stuff, but you know, we heard this new version, EL, was a very different game, a lot more footsie based, a lot more defensive, still with a lot of interesting mechanics. So that came out. I think a lot of us just gravitated towards it. It was at a time where there weren't a lot of different game options. I feel like nowadays there's so many different games you can play. But back then, yeah, you had a lot more limited options, and you know, NetPlay was, there wasn't really rollback on any games, so it was very still offline, casual, you know, focused in your local scene. So yeah, our region picked up, a lot of different regions picked it up. People coming from Melty, people coming from all kinds of different games, KOF, Guilty Gear. It was kind of its own genre, and I think that was a big part of what sparked the game. Is, yeah, it was unlike any other game. I think that's what attracted people at the time. I think that's still what attracts people even now. It was at a time also, you know, this is before Strive or Exerd, so anime games just weren't really that big, and there wasn't a large following. We had things like CE Otaku had just become a thing. Climax of the Night had not happened yet. So it was really just a big community push from each event organizer and from these scenes to kind of get together and tell people to check it out. I think we got a lot of growth at the time because it was new and it was different, and there were people from all kinds of different communities back then. I remember, you know, James Chen tried the game out at the beginning. You know, people strong in Street Fighter and all kinds of different games. It was definitely the kind of proving ground style game where people wanted to see, you know, they might be good at Guilty Gear, but you know, how are they going to do it Undernight? So that was a really big part of the EL boom, and I think we made some big splashes. You know, some good content, streams, events, tournaments. But I think ST is where things really blew up. You know, it got recognized as the official game of EVO, and that is really due to just the numbers.
UNIEL was the version of Undernight that had accomplished French Bread's goal of showing the world that they can create and sell their own original game. And people took notice, one such example being Asahi Media Works, who was looking for a way to celebrate their 20th anniversary of their in-house light novel publishing brand, Dengeki Bunko. Coming into contact with Sega, they would both get French Bread to create a new fighting game, bringing together many characters from their popular works to fight each other. This was a big opportunity. Dengeki Bunko has a lot of well-known series under their belt, and is owned by Asahi Media, which is a really big media company, which it itself is owned by Kadokawa Future Publishing. And if you don't know about Kadokawa, it's a multi-billion-dollar Japanese media conglomerate. They own a lot. So French Bread created for them Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax, a pretty easy to pick up assist fighter, featuring characters from Dengeki Bunko. And because Sega helped with the deal and the arcade cabs, Sega would sneak a couple of their characters in there as well. The game did pretty well for a one-off licensed fighting game. At least, it did well enough to get a console port, an update expansion with DLC, and an international release. It's a pretty fun game. Now, before we get to the next version of Undernight, if you have made it this far, I'd like to thank you for watching. I put a lot of work into putting these videos together, and just having you watch it makes it all worth it. But we are not done yet, so stick around. And if you like the video, go ahead and give a like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me your favorite French bread game in the comments. Once again, I thank you for watching. May 15th, 2015. Arc System Works would announce UNI's next major update, Undernight in Birth EXE UNIST. Undernight has some of the worst naming conventions in fighting games, so we'll just use the shorthand. This right here is just stupid. UNIST will come out on July 23rd, 2015 to arcades only, adding cross-cast Veil-Off, a combo burst, Vorpal traits, a unique character buff that you get from getting Vorpal State. Nanase and Byakuya, who at that time were console only, will also be added. Along with them, they will have balance changes, and 2 new characters. The return of Chimeri under her new name Phonon, who is now just a edgy middle school student who is best friends with Nansei, and 1 character who will be added almost a year later, Mika, a rushdown character who would serve as Undernight's unofficial mascot character, and one of Aurier's Lit Christ squad members, acting as the Muscle. But you have to admit, it's kind of strange that it took a year for Mika to be released, especially when her design was pretty much done since Uni 1.0. And this gap of time would be even weirder since the console version of UNIST will be released on July 20th, 2017, almost a year since Mika was added. So what were they doing all this time? Now, remember the PowerPoint I showed you explaining how inbursts and voids work? Yeah, those slides came from 2018, a year later. They were spending all this time cleaning up the story because the console version of UNIST would greatly expand on the lore of Undernight, thanks to its Chronicle mode, which is this game's visual novel mode, going over a bunch of stories giving a lot of backstory to all the characters, such as how Mika traveled from Germany to Japan by herself, how Hyde met Line, and most importantly, why Gordo is hunting down Wagner, a long-awaited character who is meant to come out for UNIEL. Wagner is considered one of Lit Christ's strongest fighters, and the one responsible for killing Gordo's close friend, Roger, because he was turning into a void after using too much of a power in a gang fight. This will be made worse as Wagner is currently looking to kill one of his best friends, Chaos, who just so happened to be using a stolen Lit Christ book. Wagner would not be the only new character to be added to the console port of UNIST, as we will also get Enkidu, a martial artist that was so strong that when no human would face him, he would turn to superhumans for a tougher challenge. If UNIEL was the game that turned Undernight into a real player, UNIST was the game to go beyond. Uni was no longer a game that played in the corner of every given tournament. Uni would grow big enough to make its own way into the big leagues, as the community around the game would boom everywhere, becoming French Bread's second game to make it to EVO's main stage, and also spawning one of the most unique gaming tournaments.
Hello everyone, my name is Shinobi. I'm a fighting game player and tournament organizer for a good almost 20 years at this point. I started playing with Guilty Gear X2 and Capcom vs SNK 2, but a few years later afterwards I started playing Melty Blood, and I started with Cadenza in the arcades and later PS2 in around 2006, 2007. And since then, I've been playing the game throughout all of its future versions through PlayStation 2 and PC, now with current code. The games I'm playing right now, I'm looking forward to Undernight in Birth, and I do dabble with the old Guilty Gears from time to time, like Plus R and Excerpt. So Climax of Night is a tournament primarily focused on French-bred developed fighting games such as Undernight in Birth and Melty Blood, Current Code, and Melty Blood Type Lumina, as well as Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax Ignition. how it began was kind of a culmination of how the current code and Undernight in-birth communities were doing at the time. Back in 2012, we had the biggest current code bracket outside of Evo when it got in 2010. So during that time, Undernight in-birth released and current code was still pretty healthy amongst the offline tournaments. You would have maybe 30 to 40 people at a tournament at a time. During that era, we thought about like what would a French bread tournament look like? What would a game, a Melty Blood like major would look like? So in 2018, I decided to answer that question and take the plunge to figure out how strong the Undernight and Melty Blood communities are in North America, and see if that strength can take it across the globe. Growing up, I was a huge Adult Swim stan. Like, I would watch maybe like a good 3-4 hours of Adult Swim, and then I pass out, and then I would wake up in the morning and think of like all the other stuff that I probably missed during that block of television. But during that time, that block of programming really resonated with me, like in my high school years. So when it came to, doing marketing for Climax, the only thing I had starting out was just the games itself. It was very dark and June-y and kind of corny in some ways. The first year, that was pretty much all we had, was just going based off of what Undernight was, the theming of Undernight pretty much. But I think like a few months later, after the first Climax, I was listening to Jay Dilla, and Jay Dilla did a few bumps for Adult Swim during the time that I was watching it, and it all just kind of clicked at that point where it's like late night programming with a fighting game that happens predominantly at night. It kind of makes sense at that point. Like, you can do so much with, first of all, like, nostalgia is huge for Adult Swim because I built the event around people my age, and it is good to see that people younger than me, or people that are like of a previous generation, of like a generation after me, that they get to see what Adult Swim was to, teenagers and stuff during like the early 2000s. And I think that was kind of dope. And then too, I'm just a hip hop stan. So I'm always a fan of combining the genres of music that I like alongside the bumps and the programming that Adult Swim was so famous for, that simple black background with just text of it's just text of nothing. It's like anything that comes up on there, it could be anything. It could be like, oh, we're doing this, we're showing this next, or we're doing this show next, or we're answering questions from a mailbox, or we're just cracking up and having fun. To realize that it was just text on a black background that you would just so finely tunedly watch every Saturday night, I thought that was pretty cool. But I thought to myself, I was like, nobody's ever doing this. Nobody's really done this. How about we do it? And to take that theming that I love so much with Adult Swim and Toonami, and then putting that into another side, another hobby of my enjoyment, which was fighting games, it just seemed like a match made in heaven, honestly. If you want to keep up with anything Climax related, you can always just hit us up on Twitter on @NightsClimax. And as it pertains to our offline event later this year, we're working on it. But if you need to know something, just stay tuned to our Twitter and we'll hook you up. As always, thank you so much for the support and love that we've received over the years. And yeah, stay working on it.
The UNIST hype train seemed to be unstoppable once it got to the main stage of EVO 2019. Very few games outside of the big FGC development teams make it here, but Uni did. And they would press their advantage by announcing the next version of Uni, UNICLR, after the top 8. Unfortunately, about a month before the announcement, the Taiwanese and Australian ratings boards will leak the game. So everyone kinda already knew. But UNICLR's fortune wouldn't change for the better. I mean, just think about it. This was during EVO 2019, the fall before the worldwide pandemic. UNICLR would come out to consoles first on February 20th, 2020 worldwide as a free DLC upgrade if you already had UNIST. You just had to buy its new character. Personally, I enjoyed this move because UNICLR didn't do much for the game. Just a few balance changes here and there, new moves for some of the cast, and a few more chapters in the visual novel. It was a token of goodwill to the fans, but there was one key issue that UNICLR had that pretty much tanked the game. It had delay-based netcode, one of the last games to have it actually. So unless you're willing to deal with bad online gameplay, there was no one to really play with. And because of that, the Uni community will lose steam and become more dormant. When asked about it, Kamone straight up said that he didn't even know that rollback netcode was even a thing until it was near the end of production for UNICLR, so there was no turning back at that point. But hey, let's take a break from this depressing series of unfortunate events, and let me tell you a story about Waldstein's past. A long time ago, before the events of Uni, there was a group called the UNICLR, which was created after Germany suffered a huge Void attack. The survivors of that attack would swear vengeance against the Void and form a group to protect the world and destroy the source of them all, the Hollow Knight. At this time, the UNICLR was actually not an all-female group. In fact, Waldstein was a member, and not only was he a member, he was considered the strongest fighter of the group, and one of Edelheld's, the leader of the UNICLR, most trusted warrior. After hearing about an abnormally large group of in-birth and void activities centered around this village in Japan, she would send an army led by Waldstein to investigate. They would find the village and then go to war with them. Because, well, saying you come in peace with an army behind you doesn't exactly work so well. The war of the Embers wouldn't last that long, because in the end, no one really wanted to fight. Being an Ember is considered pretty rare. So they settled things with a 1v1 fight between the two greatest fighters of each side. The UNICLR would bring forth Waldstein, while the village would bring Line's elder brother, Kuan. Kuan would win the fight, but in the last-ditch effort not to fell Edelheld, Waldstein launched one last all-out attack. The attack would fail to defeat Kuan, but it did cause enough damage to make Kuan's power leak out of him. Unfortunately, that power would leak into Waldstein, which started to mutate him into a void. Waldstein would try to take his own life to stop the change, but he had already lost control. Kuan, who respected Waldstein as a warrior, didn't want to see him die as a man or a void, but he didn't know how to stop it. Fortunately, Vestira was there the whole time watching the battle and gave Kuan one of her wing-like things. I think they're wings, which would become the Insulator, Hyde's sword. And with that weapon, Kuan would cut the extra energy out of Waldstein, saving his life while also leaving him in this half-void state. Waldstein, feeling duty-bound to the duel and the one who saved his life, gave his last order to his army: leave this land and tell Edelheld what had happened. Waldstein couldn't go back to her now. He had failed his mission. he was turned into a half-void, and he had a life debt to Kuon. So to him, the only option was to stay in the village and become Line's protector over the years, because Kuon asked him to. So, why is the story important? Well, first off, introduce Kuon, the big bad of the series, and the one who cursed Line to continuously take over people's bodies every time she died. Next up, it was never expressly said how close Adelheld and Waldstein was, but after the army came back and told her what had happened, this enraged Adelheld and led to all men getting kicked out of the Lit Kreis. Given that, as far as we know, Adelheld is pretty much immortal, and that she still has these feelings over 200 years later, I think they were pretty close. But this led the men that got kicked out of the Lit Kreis to form a new group in order to help prove their worth to Adelheld. They would call themselves the Ritter Ska, which would set the stage for the return of Laundrakia as UNICLR's newest character. This time, he will be the Ritterskald's top knight and Wagner's foil character. Due to the pandemic and later promises of a new version of Uni with rollback, the Uni community would kind of go into hibernation, waiting for the next big wave to come along. And to be honest, one can only imagine the heights that the next version of Uni would reach. Three years would pass since the release of UNICLR. The 10th year anniversary of Uni had come and gone, but there would be nothing but silence from French Bread, outside of we were working on it post. Alright, we're gonna take a little pause here. I've been working on this video on and off for a whole year. In the original script of this video, there was gonna be like 8 minutes of theories of what was happening in the background. But then EVO 2023 happened, and I kind of threw that whole part of the script away, because all those theories got answered. So let me tell you what happened. French Bread would take these 3 years to do 3 things. 1. Work on Multi-Blood Type Lumina. Type Moon kind of sprang the project on French Bread, and they pretty much dropped everything and worked on that game. 2. They hired more people and reorganized the company. They had to expand the team to fit the new workload, which led to 3. Work on fixing the story of Undernight. French Bread definitely needed more dedicated writers to fix up the story, and to make sure the next game's visual novel was bigger and better. They were setting everything up for the next step, the next era of French Bread, with the introduction of Uni 2, or UNISC. New art, new effects, new moves for the cast, new mechanics, rollback netcode, finally. New fixed up storyline, pushing the story forward. We would get 3 new characters confirmed. Kuon, Line's brother, Kaguya, another one of Aurier's squad, and Tsuragi, Phonon's in-birth teacher, kinda, and the one that gave her her whip. Oh, and the best part, new Raito music OST. Even though a lot of it's just remixes of the old songs, it sounds amazing. Raito has done it again. And if you haven't noticed, this whole video used only Raito music, so just keep that in mind. And it gets even better. Uni 2 kept the same core that made Uni good. But let's be honest with ourselves. All French Bread had to do was take Uni, add rollback netcode to it, and slap a 2 on it, and it will be successful. But they did so much more. And if you look at their Twitter account, or X account, or whatever, they're still adding more and more features. This game is gonna be huge. But no matter what they do, French Bread has come a long way and has carved a strong path for itself, from a small Doujin team to a bigger gaming studio with their own games and sizable licensing deals. Through hard work and stubbornness in the face of adversity, French Bread has truly become fighting games' biggest underdog. So until Uni 2 comes out, play UNICLR and Type Lumina. Buy Uni 2, and until next time, long live French Bread and long live the night. So I'd like to thank everyone for watching until the end. This is my longest video yet, and I am grateful. If you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and do so. There are videos coming down the pipeline, and I don't want you to miss them. I would like to thank Brett and Shinobi for the interviews. They do great work for the Uni community, and you should check them out. I'd also like to thank Ayako-chan for my first video sponsorship. Wasn't really expecting this one, honestly. And I'd like to thank my Patreon crew for their kind support. And if you're feeling up to it, why don't you join? It's pretty cheap. It's like $3 or something. And you get to see what new videos are coming up with a weekly update every Friday. Also, tell me what you learned about French Bread games, or if I missed anything. Anyway, have a good one, and I'm gonna go train up for TNS 9 in March. Maybe I'll see a few of you there.